We're going to do one of our, semi-regular catch-ups with Robert Patman, Professor Robert Patman, the guy who knows way more about what's happening in the world than I do. Robert, nice to see you again. Good morning to you.
Nice to see you, Sean.
All right, look, I just want to, let's start, I guess, with Israel, Gaza. The Israelis and their supporters very bullish about the recovery of these 4 hostages. But on a wider scale, we have the UN endorsing, or the Security Council endorsing another ceasefire deal or voting for another ceasefire deal. What do you know about the shape of that proposal? And is it a blueprint for an end to this conflict?
It seems to be driven by the Biden administration. And the Biden administration said before it introduced the resolution into the Security Council that Israel was supporting it. The interesting thing was that there was no formal statement of support before or after the resolution was passed by the Israeli government. Hamas has said that it welcomes the proposal but would like to amend the first part of the resolution, which calls for a 6-week ceasefire only. They want a permanent ceasefire. That's been their position, I think, since about late October last year. Anthony Blinken said it's all down to Hamas, but at the moment,
the Israelis
Qatar
are equally. It sounds like the Israelis are keeping their powder dry if they haven't come out.
Yes, well, you see, the thing, the other difficulty is not only, Sean, how long's the ceasefire going to last for? Remember that Mr. Netanyahu has made it quite clear that one key objective of this war is the eradication of Hamas.
Yeah.
And that's not been achieved yet, and nor probably can it be achieved. But another key sticking point, which hasn't got much attention, but I think is a really biggie, and that is that the American-sponsored resolution calls for a 2-state solution. And that is something Mr. Netanyahu does not accept, nor does his coalition government accept. So even if they get over the stickiness surrounding how long's the ceasefire going to be, is it going to be long-term, which is the view, I think, of most observers internationally, or is it going to be just a 6-week ceasefire in which Israel will give the Palestinians some respite? It remains to be seen. But the bigger issue, I think, is the future after this conflict is eventually stopped. And that there's a real tension there between the United States vision going forward and that of the Netanyahu government. It might be easier to reconcile the view of Benny Gantz, the opposition leader who recently left the coalition government, with that of the Biden administration, because Benny Gantz indicated that one of the reasons he was leaving is because the Netanyahu government was not saying what would happen, what would be the long-term governance arrangements for Gaza, and he left on that basis.
All right, and there is the possibility, because it is a functional democracy, unlike Gaza, there is the possibility of a change in leadership and therefore attitude in Israel. They have a democratic system.
Well, that's another big issue, of course, that's concerning many families in Israel. Mr. Netanyahu, from their point of view, he is facing legal proceedings the moment he steps down, and therefore he's got an incentive in their eyes. This is the critics of Netanyahu within Israel believe that he's got a political incentive to keep the conflict going. That may be unfair or untrue, but that remains to be seen. But there's certainly a strong perception amongst many Israelis. And, there's a concern that Mr. Netanyahu knows that he won't survive very long once the war is over, because he's become, his poll ratings don't look good. Many families of the hostages, there's still 100 hostages in detention in Gaza. Many families are bitterly critical that, the Israeli government hasn't done enough to bring them home.
Yeah. Look, I observed yesterday, as we discussed the the raid that did rescue these 4 hostages, you can see at a personal level perhaps some of the motivation with Mr. Netanyahu, given that his elder brother was killed, the only Israeli soldier killed in the raid on Entebbe. And I reflected, gosh, I can remember that as a very young person. The raid on Entebbe was internationally celebrated as a wonderful thing. But quite a different reaction in the year 2024 to the freeing of those 4 hostages from Gaza.
Yeah, well, it cost the lives of 300 Palestinians, many of whom had nothing to do
Where
with
does
Hamas.
that figure come from?
That figure comes from many of the agencies on the ground and also from the UN. And there's a large loss of life in Gaza. And one of the biggest concerns, of course, is whether Israel is now safer 8 months into this military conflict than it was at the beginning.
They haven't had anyone kidnapped for a while, have they, Robert?
No, but the point is there's with 15,000 children who, according to Matthew Miller, the State Department spokesman, are by definition not terrorists, 15,000 killed. Since the 7th of October, that means by definition there are a lot of families. Just imagine how you or I would feel if we hated Hamas and we had family members killed by Israel. We wouldn't be particularly well disposed towards that government.
And that's why I brought the thing. Benjamin Netanyahu lost his brother to terrorists, and maybe we see, we see years later the result of that sort of resentment and Utu, I guess we call it in New Zealand.
And what I think many of us desperately want is for Israel to be able to live in security with the Palestinians able to achieve self-determination.
Yeah,
and that is the crux of this. There's no military solution to this problem.
Yeah,
and that's where the Americans'
frustration. Does it make a blind bit of difference, Robert, whether or not we're taking part in the RIMPAC thing alongside the Israeli Navy, which is the latest thing that the...
Well, I think, New Zealand found itself at loggerheads with the Biden administration over the handling of the Gaza situation. We were the first country on the 27th of October. When I say the first, we were the only country in the Five Eyes to part company with them and vote for an immediate humanitarian truce. We sponsored the resolution in the General Assembly of the 12th of December that demanded an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. And many of those efforts were they were in the General Assembly, whose resolutions are non-binding, but many of those efforts, parallel efforts in the UN Security Council, were vetoed by the United States. Now, it's good that the United States, 8 months into this conflict, have taken the view that they do need a ceasefire. But many of us feel that, United States, in a sense, by giving the Netanyahu government unconditional support, has been a party to the erosion of humanitarian law.
Yeah.
And a core objective for New Zealand internationally is not just to uphold the rules-based system, but to actually, strengthen it.
Yeah.
Because we trade with more than 100 countries. We need international relations based on rules and principles, not raw power.
All right. Let's come back home now. The Chinese Premier in Wellington today. Is this a big deal?
I think so. It's interesting because the timing's...